All right, so now recording. Let's get started. So welcome everybody to the Dunes Literary Series. I'm Bill Allegrezza. I have co-host of Garen Cycle, Ceci Villarreal, and Aaron Schaefer. They're all here. We have a lot of hosts for this series. So we have two incredible writers who are also wonderful people and are very close to my own heart. Generally, I like to do short introductions and just get to the work, but it's really hard to contain all the accomplishments of these writers. There's so much. I'll try to keep it short. So we're going to first start with Eileen Tabios. And I'm just going to say a few things about her. I could actually talk about Eileen's work all night. She knows this already, but I have a whole shelf in my books, one of my bookcases just dedicated to her books in itself. So I think to get started, in a few years ago, I was reading an interview, and she said in response to the question of, talk about her career as a writer, she said, I have a life, not a career as a writer. And I thought, yeah, that's perfect, because her work often combines the personal and the literary, and they kind of reshape what we think of as literature in general. So when reading her work, I often find myself asking, like, what am I reading? Is this autobiography? Is this biography? Is this a novel? Is this a play? Is this criticism? Like, what am I looking at? And I like that because she's blending literary genres and exploring the personal, how we construct the personal, the political, and just playing with language. So I think, more than even that, I think these explorations of hers have had a ripple effect across the American literary scene. And I think her influence can be seen on experimental writers and traditional writers, which I think is a little bit unique in itself. If you throw out her name in an American writers gathering, somebody's going to bring up, the beauty of her language, but also her generosity and her ideas. So as for achievements, so she started a press. She started several poetry review journals. She's created poetic forms that have launched books themselves. I think as creative writing teachers know, like a lot of us teach forms. I teach her Haiku form that she came up with around, early 2000s in almost all of my classes. At the latest count, I did this today, but I'm not very good at counting, which is funny, but I think I counted 74 published books. I think that's right around there. It's a lot of books. I'm sure I missed some in my count. That's just so much. This is novels, edit editions, poetry. She's done just a ton of work. Her work has won prizes, has been translated, and of course has been talked about, with all kind of accolades. So she just came out with a new book, Because I Love You, I Became More. And if you don't remember anything I just said, I would say, go buy this book. I read it and I was like, she's holding it up right now. It's one of the best books in any genre I've read in years. I literally was like, okay, I must stop writing right now because this is amazing. And I'm like, there's no way I can even get in the room with this. It's just an amazing book. And I'd say go order it right now. So welcome, Eileen Tabios.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Bill. And it means a lot coming from a longtime reader because, when I was a young poet, one of my rare mentors told me, if you're going to be a poet, if you ever end your life as a poet with a dozen core readers, you will be very, very lucky. And I always thought Bill would be one of them, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So I'll be reading for the first time from this book, which actually is being officially released this month. It's both poems, but also poetics, prose, a combination I always like. And so I'd like to start by sharing something from Bruce Lee, which actually captures my poetics, if you will. And the martial arts master said, you must be shapeless, formless, like water. When you pour water in a cup, it becomes the cup. When you pour water in a bottle, it becomes the bottle. When you pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water can drip and it can crash. Become like water, my friend. And that's captures my poetics, I say, because I don't actually want the limits of my life to be the determinants of what I write in poems. I try to pay attention to the world, and its concerns become what will create my poems, which is also a euphemism for something more crass. It's actually ambitious of me to do that. It's an impossible ambition where I want to say that I as author is equal to the world. But, you know, if you're not going to be ambitious, what's the point of being a poet? So I'll begin by reading a poem that I titled Autobiography. And it's briefly, it says, I wanted to bear all the world's accents and ended up with none. I am proud of what causes no one to listen to me. Ignore me now as I describe what has never existed, a black rose. So a black rose, which doesn't exist in nature, is my metaphor for a selfless poet, because the poem can be bigger than the poet. And because I just mentioned Bruce Lee, I'd like to share a poem I wrote while learning the Filipino stick fighting technique of Kali, which I wrote this poem mentally while I was battling another Kali student, and we were wielding bamboo sticks at each other. And its title is Kali. I bare my forearm to receive the blows of your bamboo weapon. We are instructed by a voice suddenly distant as darkness falls on what exists beyond the shifting span of our two forms. Our bodies may as well be our shadows, and perhaps they are. Aim at the muscle, never the wrist. The lightest flick, barely felt by flesh, lands as calamity against bone. Spotlit by a beam whose source I know is my eyes, the angles on your face sharpen, and suddenly I sense you too bear the possibility of cruelty. Beyond the fence encircling this evening's engagement, a neighbor's trembling hand rises to pull at a lamp's tassel, transforming a small window into a hovering moon. You raise your right hand into the strike position. By the edge of the lawn, ants pause, stilling the nerves in their fevered raisin bodies to watch the birth of a warrior that once you sung you would never become. You begin to the tune of a wind chime, swaying from the knock of a pilgrim spirit searching for that night's bed. It is my responsibility to inform you when your blows become too hard. But one of the many things you will never know about me is I never concede when a strike fells me to my knees. When I nod, whispering, too much, I act as a diplomat, facing the question, furrowing your brow as I make no objections to the increasing power of your bamboo whip against my heated flesh. I want to say, honey, yes, it hurts. But I have forgotten anguish is something else besides an element to conceal. For you, I lied. I called the pain too much. To live poetry, instead of just marking words on a page, is to live like a poem. None of it is too much or too little. It is only what it is, and all of it is perfectly pitched. So what I like about this book is that I'm able to bring poetics out more discernibly. And I think at this point in my life, I appreciate that because I've been thinking a lot about, a poet's life. While we were finishing the book production and design of this book, Russia invaded Ukraine. So I thought I would share the first 4 poems I wrote about that incident, and I've written many since. And the first was actually a monostitch or a one-liner because I was initially almost speechless at the brazenness with which Putin invaded Ukraine. The title is Kharkiv, All Roses Became Gray. And the second poem relates to, if you recall, in the beginning when the West was trying to respond to the invasion, sanctions came up. And I came across this paragraph in The Atlantic that made me write this poem about oligarchs. And it's an epigraph, and I read, What is an oligarch without ostentation? For many Russian elites, the answer is apparently nothing. The sanction threatens oligarchs with a kind of annihilation, similar to the phenomenon that sociologists describe as social death. That is why Russian elites were so quick to gather up their expensive toys as soon as sanctions were announced, and why several have taken the extraordinary step of publicly begging Putin for a quick end to the war. Let us anticipate the impending crisis for mistresses in London as marble townhomes become confiscated, as credit card limits eliminate infinity. No more shopping in #Milano. No more partying in #Saint-Tropez. No more diamonds in #Antwerp. Quote, the need to see and be seen is a fundamental driver of human affairs. Oligarchs need not just to be, but be seen as filthy rich, a need that rises with economic wealth, unquote. Yachts to luxury purses to soccer franchises seen through social media now help investigators freeze assets for sanctions. Let us not forget, let us anticipate bringing forth those violins smaller than raised thumbs, with their music rousing the surgically plastered to take off red-heeled shoes and aim at ducking oligarchs. In the coverage of the invasion, I caught this headline that became the title of my poem. Quote, wife of Russian soldier tells him, you go there, rape Ukrainian women, but use condoms, unquote, is this morning's headline. I regurgitated a word I never wished to see in a poem. I, quote, regurgitated, unquote, my breakfast of coffee and leftover pork belly adobo still superb because its vinegar had been added, not stirred. Details matter. Soldiers raped the women unable to leave the cities, where the golden faces of sunflowers stared at the sky as they were shelled into gray. Details matter. Soldiers raped the elderly, those too sick to move, the ones who refused to leave to care for the elderly and those too sick to move. It's an old story unable to become cliché. Clichés exist when they are overused until they lose meaning. But rape remains fresh, as Balzac's, quote, frosty morning in autumn, as Browning's, quote, hedgerows cut there, as Anonymous's, quote, young head of lettuce, as Coleridge's, quote, seaborn Cythera, as Chaucer's, quote, falcon coming out of Mew. Fresh, especially when one story introduces a wife's sordid support. Another headline, another old story, quote, female betrayal, 3 reasons women hurt other women, unquote. Envy, competition, self-worth. Envious for more power, competition for territory, self-worth irrelevant. Details matter. Swinburne likened the gray of a sunflower's new mask to a flower ruined. Cobb to a cow's breath on a frosty morning. Barham to a badger. Shakespeare to glass. Longfellow to a shield embossed in silver. Gray. Details matter. The pork belly was cut into 2-inch pieces, then marinated overnight with soy sauce, garlic, sugar, and peppercorns. After it was cooked for 1.5 hours to make the pork tender but not falling apart, the adobo stew was served over something that should be the topic of this poem. Jasmine rice, whose delicate floral and buttery scent warrants poetry, and whose bodies evoke miniature 3/4 moons that remind us of a Haiku poem. To what smart poets aspire, writing only about the gorgeous moon. And I suppose it's true, if the world was doing well, we poets can just keep writing odes to the moon. And you know that the world is topsy-turvy when you walk out onto your front yard, you see a lovely row of white roses, and those white roses remind you of ash. Candescence. White roses bring snow amidst a drought, the same white of ashed cities, the same white of pages emptied of solutions, with consolation existing only by smoothing issues into virtual images, flattening substance into white roses blossoming as if wars weren't inflicted against the climate, against Kharkiv, against Kyiv, against Chernihiv, against Mariupol, against Kherson, against Mykolaiv, against Odessa, against sunflowers whose gold whitened into gray. So that was my Ukraine poems, a postscript that's actually integral to the book. And the book, another war humans wage is not against each other, but against the environment. And I speak to you indeed from one of the ground zeros of mega wildfires in the West, which is Napa Valley. And I speak to you as a refugee from the wildfire for 3 years now. This poem is entitled July. You walk out into ash to discover the world's on fire. But we already knew that. And next, I was moved to write this poem after I saw this detail that became its epigraph when The Guardian reported a mass die-offs of birds in the southwestern US caused by starvation. Bass notes in the Anthropocene. Sky weeps songbirds emaciated after eating their own muscles. Oh, sly silence with your bass, corpses hitting ground, 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 corpses hitting ground. The short form, I find, is often effective for allowing me, if not us, to address immense topics. So I wrote tankas about the hurting environment. The great grief's tankas. As plastic smothers oceans and forests miss trees, I grieve with you, dear. We drink polluted water, ethics of entanglement. 2. Drought in the desert, cut through the cactus to see interior as dry as the cracked sod surrounding you, for whom no one sheds tears. 3. When the ocean grieves, its anguish can't be discerned. Water swallows tears. I insist the faucet broke, spraying my cheeks with non-tears. 4. Where waterfalls end, your face welcomes the cool spray. You admire beauty from wet silver, eroding mountains aware of their death. 5. Storm season arrives. Snow falls beyond the window, whitening the world. Yet its lack of sound cancels belief, as if worlds don't fall. 6. Black cat against night, against thoughts as the world burns, like children playing hide and seek in parks so bright, no one stumbled on omens. 7. Despair for the world grew, leading him to water, floating on the lake. He waits for peace, not knowing. Hunters shot the great heron. The reading of that last tanka sucked. It didn't work. I'm going to read it again the right way, just for comparison. Despair for the world grew, leading him to water. Floating on the lake, he waits for peace, not knowing hunters shot the great heron. And the last tanka. We'd grimly thinned trees to prepare for winter's winds, but the leaves still fell, tree limbs still broke. How did we come to trust preparation? And my last poem comes with an illustration. I present to you Monster High dolls. I've been buying Monster High dolls from eBay because I needed doll avatars for the characters that are populating the novels that I'm writing. And they ended up, of course, inspiring a poem. And a poem that I think perhaps opens the door to an answer to the dilemma in which we find ourselves with our hurting world. And this poem is entitled Epiphany at Monster High. I realize I like to rescue dolls discarded by children who grow old by forgetting love. I dust them, shampoo their plastic hair, now a collection of split ends, and bathe their bodies, many scarred by animal teeth. When I rescue dolls, I revive their ghosts, who now bring me their language of longings, fresh fodder to translate for making new poems. I reciprocate. I clean their clothes or give them new apparel. For one treasured skirt, I apply my inheritance of mom's needle and thread. Most need new shoes. The ghosts cease crying and masticating hapless tongues behind scarred, stiff cheeks. After sponge baths, smile surface from erased grit. Most dolls are made with upturned lips, for they rationalize their existence as conduits for joy, for grace. I discover I like to rescue dolls, to rediscover how I love to rescue love. Thank you. I hope that was long enough, Bill.
That was great. And actually, when I read the book, I was like, wow, there's a Monster High poem in this. I did not expect that.
Did you say you live in fire country?
I do, in Napa.
Like Northern California?
Yes, yes, indeed.
Like near Paradise or something?
Sorry?
Near Paradise?
Not near, but in the same area as Paradise, yeah. I was a victim of the glass fire, which took down, it started actually in my neighborhood. And from my neighborhood, it went to ravage 2 counties. Ravaged nearly 100,000 buildings, including my guest house, and smoke damaged my own house. And as a result, I've been living in a rental house for the last 3 years since then. Yeah, so.
All right, thank you. That was wonderful. So we're going to have time for questions at the end. I'm sure we all have questions, which will be great. So our second reader is the Italian poet Serena Piccoli, and you probably just said, wait, but I don't speak Italian. Yeah. She's written books in Italian, but recently she's been publishing books in English as well. And so hopefully that's what we're going to hear from tonight, although you can throw some Italian in there if you want to. So she's a playwright, poet, photographer, translator, teacher, arts organizer. She's created a literary event. She's just talented across the board. We're going to hear some of her writing, but I really encourage you to check out her webpage to look at her photography. I think some of the street scenes she does, you can find them on her webpage. They're just really amazing. I could just flip through them all day. So as for writing in English, her recent poetry book, Gulp Gas, really doesn't shy away from anything. She engages with politics, gender violence, social justice. It's really, I feel like, a high energy poetic construct. It's like this conversation about the world we're in. And, you know, there's one poet who says on the blurb on the back, Piccoli's poetry kicks ass, which is, I think, my experience of reading the book itself. So our collaborative dual language book, Prunes and Prisms, will come out in the late summer or fall. So wait for that to come out. Check it out yourself. Welcome, Serena Piccoli.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Bill. Thank you, Eileen. Yeah, it's great to be here with all of you. Thank you to all of you who are listening. Yes, I can't wait to read some of my poems for you and to hear your comments, your questions. Yes, the book was published in last September, and it contains poems that I wrote from 2019 to basically a few days before until summer 2022. So of course you can imagine it has poems influenced by the pandemic and by other world events that we have all witnessed. One of the topics is like for Eileen is our planet. So I'm gonna start with this one, which is the poem that opens the collection of poems. So it's called "It's Honey, Darling." We have killed all the bees. Now, as we are the smartest on earth, at the same time, once a month, we all stand outside, tongue out, to lick one drop of acid rain and imagine it's honey. The second one that I want to read is the title is 28th Day. I remember because when lockdown started in Italy, as you all know, we were right after China. Unfortunately, so it started at the end of February 2020. I was one of the first in Italy to lose my job because I was teaching in nurseries. So of course, in overnight, I lost my job for months and months. So I started keeping track of every day of lockdown. So this poem was written on the 28th day. While nature keeps going, we hold our breath, still and torn among tulips erect. And in the lurking vastness that crushes us, he is sieving the soil to find his mother's ashes. Yeah, I was thinking of all the. I kept like a diary of every day. I used to write a poem, and of course, as you remember, all the scenes that we were watching on the telly were terrible, of course. Another one, it's of this sort of diary. It's the 53rd day, and that's a love poem because my fiancée Alexandra, who is here tonight, we unfortunately we were supposed. I'm Italian. I was living in Italy, and she's English, and she was living, of course, in England. We were supposed to. We met in January, and then we said to each other, "Okay, we will see each other again at the end of February, as usual." You know, we used to meet once a month. And of course, for 6 months, for 6 long months, we couldn't meet and we couldn't see each other. So on the 53rd day, I wrote this poem. Pickle walls fragment my body in this no time, no space shit, no page books, and 12 broken clocks trap me in. The steady loud drill and the quirky roof 12 inches above me. No petal daisies in the bin, mold on a dead mannequin, and in between the sudden breath of your shimmering verse. Thank you. Yes, if I haven't read this poem for such a long time, so it kind of reminds me of, and I'm sure I can tell from your face that you, it reminds you of those incredible times and hard times that we all went through. Last summer, one of, I think it was the last poem I wrote before the book was published, and I wrote it on Elba Island where I was with Arianna, my friend, who is here tonight as well, and she's a poet. She's a very good poet too, and we met there because we were at the poetry festival on Elba Island, which is off the coast of Tuscany. So this is the poem Greetings from Summer 2022. At 6 a.m. every day, I drive down to Marciana Marina to watch 10 different species of fish, watching my goofies swimming. Elba Island and its blooming bougainvillea, Roman ruins overlooking the blue sea, an old piazza and a little church perched on mountains. Beauty makes us resist. 1,000 miles from here, Tony Blair is being made a knight. His co-invasion of Iraq in 2003 ushered hundreds of thousands into death and chaos. The constant fear is the spring behind their lawmaking, war-making. BNB cast Saddam as a global threat who possessed the weapons of mass destruction. Constant fear to oppress us all, imposed by the propaganda of masters and arse leakers. The fish in front of me are whistling and wondering what the hell I'm thinking. Tony Blair's becoming knight in Windsor Castle, a few miles away from Belmarsh prison, where Julian Assange has been ill for years and stuck in arbitrary imprisonment, unconvicted for political reasons, for revealing BNB's crimes. Anger makes us speak up, us and them, They're feasting while we're fasting. We'll eat the rich while we're watching fish. We'll eat the prophet, the capitalist prophet, while he's dying to make profit. They're fishing for our data. We'll feed them with fattled feta. They'll be starving, they're not used to it, while binging on a fake buffet, choking on pork stew. They'll tell us to obey again, but many will refuse. They'll tell us to trust their mandate, but gutted and disgusted will deconstruct it. The blue bay is so beautiful to be missed again for their oppression. Beauty makes us survive, and you think fish are useless. Then I want to read one more about it's a poem that I like to read. It's "The sun kisses the prettiest." We have a saying in Italy that says the sun kisses the most beautiful ones, and I associated that, of course, in an absurd way, thinking of some terrible conditions that we have throughout the countryside in Italy. We have the so-called modern slaves, usually are migrants from Africa or from Eastern Europe, who work 12 hours a day for €2, and in the heat, in the countryside, in terrible conditions, and they live there, and they are exploited, and many of them die because of the conditions in which they live. But business is business, so who cares about these people? And nobody cares, and they die, and many times they even die, and nobody knows that they are there. So I think it's terrible. So the sun kisses the prettiest. The sun kisses the prettiest. It's an Italian saying. He says, €3 per hour, 12 hours per day, the red gold burning in his ears, between the toes, up the ass. Picking tomatoes 7 days a week, bent and burned, crashing in the shack with a stroke. The red mud boss's boots pushed him down the creek at noon before stripping his poor pendant. The sun kisses the prettiest. Lucky you, he said. And maybe I will read the last one because I don't want to. The last one is a poem that I usually read whenever I can, whenever they invite me, and you will understand why I read this one all the time. It's called Shingle, and it's dedicated to Kurdish women. August the 3rd, 2014, systematic rape of 3,000 Yazidi Kurdish women. On the liquor stores they destroy, they spray the name of the Caliph with drug and booze in the pockets. We're all running to Mount Shingle. No water, food, shelter from the West. Up here, the only plant is tiny, like mercy. Some humans are more humans than others. Some women are less people than others. I left Germany to go back to my homeland. We all live where dead women take up arms, philosophy, politics. You don't protect us. We self-defend each other. Until yesterday, I had to stay home waiting to be married, waiting for Western help. I laid out my braid on her and said, I will come, I will see, I will conquer. I leave you the rose from that tiny plant on shingle. A rose has thorns, not to attack, but to defend. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you both. That was really wonderful. So we got some time for questions. I have a bunch, but I'm going to throw it to the room first. So if you have a question and want to ask it, just unmute or throw it in the chat and we'll go from there. Okay, question for Eileen. Eileen, what made you choose the Japanese tanka as one of your preferred forms for expression?
I was cheating. I consider myself a maximalist rather than a minimalist. So short forms are actually, I just feel I don't do them very well. I chose the tanka simply because it allowed for 5 lines versus the haiku or hainaku, which allows only for 3 lines. So, and I also liked the volta, the turns that these Asian forms make within such a compressed period. I like that about the haiku, and I like that about the tanka. But I just opted for the tanka because it had, 2 more lines.
So a follow-up with that, does writing the short form sometimes make you write more of them? So like once you write one, you just keep writing and writing and writing?
That's a great question. I can imagine that to be happening. And I know it happens with many poets. It doesn't happen with me because I actually, when I know that I'm writing in a very short, compressed form, I have my brain turned on. I really loathe what I'm doing right now. Let me get it over with and then move on to the free verse or the prose poem form or the novel. I mean, I just, I do it. I don't like it. And maybe that's why I do it, because I'm a poet. I've been writing more and more of these short forms precisely because I just don't feel comfortable doing them.
Charles, what is the best capsule definition of poetry in Italian, like Valerie's permanent hesitation between sound and sense?
Oh, wow. Charles, yes, I don't understand your question. Sorry about that.
Well, how would you define poetry for you in Italian? As what is poetry, I guess, for Italian?
For me, sorry. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I see. I thought about Italian poetry in general. For me, I think it's, I always think of a sentence by Isabel Allende. It's always in my mind when she said, "Write what mustn't be forgotten." Yeah, to me that's poetry, because poetry, it's being short. It's to me, it's more, maybe it's more powerful than other types of other literary genres. So yes, I think it's that.
I feel like that comes up with both of you. Like Serena, your poetry has a lot of politics in it, and Eileen, your poetry has more politics than a lot of American poets tend to do, right? So I'm wondering, how do you think poetry and politics mix? I mean, that's a vague question, but maybe you can just say something about it.
for me, it makes sense that my poems get more political precisely because I am a Filipino or Philippine-born poet writing in English. And I'm very well aware that the only reason that I'm fluent in English is because English was used in the 20th century as a tool for colonialism. It was through English language, becoming the language for business, commerce, education, politics in the Philippines, that it became widespread across an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. And today, here's a poet, me, and the only language I'm fluent in is English. So for me, writing well in English is the best revenge. But writing well also means upending the English language. Some of the best known Filipino and Philippine poets are those who came out under the tutelage of teachers who were trained by University of Iowa Writing Workshop. So they're great at lyric poetry. Filipinos are great at lyric poetry. I went to the experimental route specifically because I wanted to disrupt English's origins in the Philippines. Hence, it's more political. But is that right, what you said, Bill? Because that surprises me. Am I actually more political than, if you forget my Philippine background, are my poems actually more political than most American poets? Is that right?
I think so. I mean,
really,
they're individuals, of course, all over the place.
Yeah.
I think of it as a whole. They engage more political. I mean, and they're very personal at times too. So.
Yeah. But okay. Well, actually, that's correct. I mean, now that I think about it and think about the poems that are published out there that I read often, it's true. A lot of lyricism, beautiful poems. Politics is often ugly. So, yeah. But I'd like to think I could write beautiful poems when I want.
Did you ever write anything that it mentioned Jose Antonio Vargas, that dreamer advocate in USA?
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
The leader of the dreamer movement in USA that everybody thought was Latino is actually from the Philippines.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, I'm aware of the movement, but I didn't focus on that detail. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that would make sense. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of empathy that we Filipinos, not to speak for all Filipinos, would feel on migrant issues. In fact, before Cesar Chavez, it was a Filipino who had helped start the labor movement in California's farms, but he's not as well known as Cesar Chavez. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But what was that? What about that? What you had a question? Did I?
Well, I was just thinking if you were writing on political things and anti-colonial and immigrant and all that, I just his name came into my head because I saw him do this long interview on one of those news talk shows, right. And that's where I discovered. I mean, his English is perfect because he came really young. You close your eyes, you think you're talking to some kid from Indiana.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have papers.
Right.
And so they brought him without papers, and he's been here his whole life, and he's done everything, and he's really smart. And his name sounds like he's from Mexico, and everybody thinks he's Mexican, but he's not.
And interestingly, because there's a whole set of a framework on poets of color, people of color, including myself, what kind of poetries they write. Although I have written on such topics, including the dreamers, and I've written on migration, immigration, my focus has not actually been, or it ceased being more in the narrative content, and I've been more about disrupting language and form of language itself. One reason I do that is that, I mean, if I think people here, you all know the experimental poetry community. There isn't as much representation by poets of color there. As well, a lot of poets of color do that kind of writing very well. I don't see a need for myself to be yet another poet along that vein. So I go off on my own way, and I find myself in this experimental poetry community, more focused on form, or as much focused on form as it is on content.
Serena, we got a question specifically for you, which is, do you see a connection between your poetry and your photography, the visual element mixing with the sound element?
Yes, yes. I usually see images, yes, in my mind, and then I write what I see. Yes, so absolutely. Yes, basically, yes, all the time. Yes, first the visual element, and then the sound element. Yes, and the writing. Yes, absolutely. I want to say that what Eileen has just said about the language, and it's very, very interesting. So thank you, Eileen, for sharing that.
Well, to follow up, I was going to ask you this when you're yourself, Eileen is talking about disrupting English, and you're choosing to write in English as a second language over Italian. So why have your books lately been in English instead of Italian? Not that you're not writing Italian, but like what you've been publishing lately is English. Why?
Yeah, I don't know. Like it was in 2016 that it's funny, I know, that my brain started to switch from Italian into English, and I found that I really, really, I think I'm more fluent in when I write poetry in English. That's fascinating. So. Yes, I really love to play with the sound. Maybe because I think English is more is like short, like it has the short structure, maybe shorter words, expressions, while Italian is more. Is a bit longer. We tend to maybe to speak a lot, and like English speaking people are more, yeah, even even in emails or whatever, they're shorter. And so I find that it is fantastic, I think, for poetry. So I think my brain realized that before I was aware. So I really like to write in English. It's yes, faster. It gets to, I think I get to the point better than in Italian.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because I'm so interested with language. You said that your brain switched to English. Did you start thinking in English, or would you get like words, or like just be attracted to particular phrases, or did you actually start like, was there like a switch where like just you would think your own thoughts in English? I'm just really curious about this language shift.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always loved English since I was at elementary school. I started on my own translating songs because I was born in 1974, so Google didn't exist at that time. So I had to take the old big vocabulary dictionary and translate from English songs because I wanted to understand. So I fell in love with English when I was a child. And so definitely, yes, it helped my thoughts, it helped thinking, and it helped, having my words, having that sound mind for so many years. And then, yes, I think it's brilliant. I really like it. And Italian poets who are friends of mine tell me that they do think I do better. I write better when I write poetry. I write better in English, which is yes, odd because it's my second language. Yes, it's a language that I've learned at school.
All right, we got time for like one or two more questions. There's one in the chat that I'll just read to you. It's for both of you. So it says, do you ever sway towards more cultural pieces of literature? How do you incorporate your culture into your work?
I'm a big believer in the Filipino indigenous trait of kapwa. And kapwa basically means that everything, it's seeing the self and the other, which I translate into everything and everyone is connected in some way across all time. So I collapse past, present, now, in past, present, and future into a singular now. And it's from that space where I try to write my poems. So kapwa, through kapwa, I write most of my writings. And in the practicality of it, what it means is sometimes I would write words or phrases that seemingly have nothing to do with each other, but if I place them right next to each other, if I sculpt the words that way rather than write the words that way, somehow when the reader comes to that work and reads it, some meaning is generated, which I may or may not have intended. Because, and that proves my belief in kapwa, that everything is related anyway. And I think the poet Tan Lin once explained to me, Gertrude Stein did something different anyway, where she said that if you place one word next to another word, just the rub between these two words that were seemingly unrelated, a meaning will spring out. So it's that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. I incorporate my culture in my work. I'm thinking when I insert images like from, for example, from the geographical side of my country, or like I said, like those contemporary issues or like traditional sayings. So yes, I think it's important. I think it gives it gives an identity to what we write to. And then I was reading Melinda's question too.
Yeah, if you guys want to, if you can see Melinda's question, you can answer that too. That'll be our last one. So to be a woman and a poet today is a political act. I love how you both explored women's experiences in your work today. Is there a sense that to reference feminist realities is somehow less rigorous in contemporary poetry?
Is my immediate response to that. Although I've written on women and women's issues before, I think that has not been a topic or a theme that I've privileged over other topics or themes. And I think, I'm not sure why that's the case, but I think it has to do with how I have problems with identity poetics. And I'm generalizing here, but in the short time frame that we had, that's my answer, Melinda. Yeah.
My writings are, yes, feminist, definitely. What I write for theater, and yes, poetry as well. Yes, as you have seen, contemporary social issues are always in my mind. So whether they are feminist topics or social rights or the environment, social injustice, yes, absolutely. It's like I said before, yes, write what mustn't be forgotten. I think it's a great rule for me, and I want to follow it. I think I'm lucky, so I think I should be the voice of those that don't have it or cannot express yes, what they are going through. So yes, also the feminist topics, absolutely.
Well, thank you
both for answering that.
And Melinda, of course, this then is the book for you, because I think it's actually the most women-centric and feminist-centric book that I've authored. And I just want to read a haiku from it that's titled Menstrual Haiku. When I bleed, I camouflage tears. So I'm interested in that, in your question. It's just that it's such a multi-layered, challenging question.
Yeah, I want to add that, for example, many of my poems, for example, in this book, are dedicated to women. Well, Shingle, for example, the Kurdish women, then one to Liliana Segre, who is a Holocaust survivor. She's Italian. She's a senator. Or to another woman, another Iranian artist, for example, who was arrested just for protesting for her people. So yes, Melinda, yes, definitely. The feminist topic is important in my writings.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you both for reading. That was really amazing. I really enjoyed this hour ahead with you guys. So clap. It's always weird clapping on Zoom, but it's like the stadium clap. You just need to get a clap track or something. But it was wonderful. And thank you all for coming to listen to this reading. It is, of course, available as a recording. This is the last reading for this academic year in the reading series. This will kick back off in August. I've had lots of wonderful readers. This one will be available probably in a few days, and all the readings are online. So encourage you to go check out all the wonderful writers we've had. I really feel like tonight we ended with just two brilliant writers that are very close to my heart. So it was very wonderful to have them. So thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank
you, Serena.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, everyone.